Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of the 31 Nights of Halloween Horror! The Perverts Have Spoken! Ah! We have reached the end, the pinnacle, episode 31, it is Halloween! Yes. And always at the end of the 31 Nights of Halloween Horror, I look back and see what I have done and look forward to the future. But tonight, I am going to talk about a subject that was brought up to me by one of you, my subscribers. I believe it was Robbie's Mom 1. And they asked me a question. They asked me a question about why is it that I review so many older movies from before 2000, wondering if I just don't like the horror movies of the present day. And the answer is a little bit complex. Part of it is got to do with content. Part of it has to do with preferences. But it's not like I think that movies back then were better than the movies that are now. There are good movies out today. I mean, examples, It Follows, The Conjuring, movies like Cabin in the Woods. We have some good movies, good horror movies that are coming out. But it feels to me that there has been a shift in tone, a shift in content. And those shifts are mainly stuff that I'm not necessarily a fan of. But let's start with one of the big reasons why. There are more movies out there from the that are older than 2000 than there are made after 2000. There's just more horror movies that were made in that period of time, just because we're talking about 15 years, 2015, and we're talking about since the dawn of film, so we're talking about decades worth of films. So inevitably, if I'm going to talk about horror movies, they're going to end up being older than 2000s. It's just the sheer numbers game. If I took every horror movie ever made and put it in a computer and then just told the computer to choose one randomly, the odds are it's going to be older than 2000. The majority of the movies that were going to be picked on a random is going to be before 2000. It's just because of that. There's just a sheer plethora of horror movies out there to choose from. So, unfortunately, it just so happens to be that I choose those movies as opposed to newer ones. And look at what I've done on the 31 Nights of Halloween Horror here. I have reviewed about 23 horror movies. Of those 23, 7 of them were made after 2000. So, a little less than a third of the movies that I've reviewed are kind of, I guess, contemporary, newer movies, made within the last 15 years. So, yeah, there's more older movies than there are newer movies, but I think those ratios are pretty good considering the massive amount of movies there are made before 2000. So there's one reason right there. But another reason is, and one of the main reasons I do movie reviews on this channel, is that I want to touch upon the movies that are from the past that may not have been remembered by people, may be a bit rare, unheard of. That's why you see a lot of the Asian movies in there too, is because, my main audience is America. They're the #1 demographic. Number 2, I think, is Japan? I don't know. Saudi Arabia's in there for some reason. I don't know why, but so I want to expose people to movies and that they may have never known about, that they would not have known about unless here I am talking about it. I mean, when you go back and you go into YouTube and you search The Rape After, I think I am one of the few reviews that you can find. I'm right up there on the first page because not a lot of people know about that movie. At least not a lot of people are talking about that movie. So it's also about age. I am an old guy. I'm an old guy. Nothing I can do about it. And most of my viewers, according to demographics, are 18 to 24, 18 to 25. And so a lot of these people didn't grow up knowing about the 80s horror movies, 70s horror movies. You talk about greats like Dario Argento, unless they're like into horror movies, unless they really kind of got into horror movies and studied horror movies and asked around and really made the effort to look, they probably would never heard of Lucio Fulci, Dario Argento, Umberto Bava, Mario Bava. I meant to say Mario, but Umberto's pretty good too. Ruggero Deodato, Lenzi, Joe D'Amato, to name a few, like Italian like horror geniuses. They never even heard of them, never knew that these movies existed. In a way, things like John Carpenter. A lot of people nowadays, I talk to some not young kids, but like 20-year-olds, and I talk about John Carpenter, and they're like, "Who's John Carpenter?" And I went, "Halloween?" It's like, "Oh, I heard of Halloween." It's like, did he star in it? So yeah, part of it is to expose, to grow knowledge, to have people know that these exist, so then that they're worth checking out. So that's also part of it. I do newer movies. They're already kind of in the public mindset. I do a review of The Conjuring. There's 1,000 reviews of The Conjuring. Same with The Babadook. Same with It Follows. Same with The Purge. All those movies, the new Poltergeist movies, they're recent. They're in the public knowledge. And yes, it's good for me to do reviews of those because people are genuinely interested in what I have to think about these movies. So there's always that. And I respect that and I understand that, but to me, I find it more satisfying to review a movie that is a little bit rarer and then have people go, "My God, this movie sounds insane. I wanna find it. Where can I find this movie? What can I do?" Or even get, like I've been having a back and forth with another subscriber, I hope they're a subscriber, where we were talking just back and forth about movies, these different movies that were like, "Hey, this movie and this movie." And that's awesome. I love that because there were some movies that subscriber told me about that weren't even on my radar, and I'm like, "Oh, wow, I should look into those. I should check those out." It's not always just about what I can give you. It's part of what I get back, too, in the interactions and the suggestions. And so that's another reason why I do that is because there is a plethora of movies, and I want to try to lasso as much as I can. So there's that aspect, but there is also another aspect which I'm going to talk about right now, and that is there has been a change in tone in horror movies. There has been a change in direction and in content in horror movies. And I'm saying like an overall change. Like back in the 70s and the 80s, probably up to the mid 80s or late 80s, like horror movies used a lot of exploitative elements. A lot of blood, a lot of gore, a lot of violence, a lot of sex, a lot of nudity. Yes, all kinds of stuff. Because they realize that it's hard. It's hard to make an engaging horror movie that can keep their audience for long periods of time without putting in these little things like gore effects, like, oh man, like there's a wonderful head slicing scene, a head explosion here or there, some beautiful women taking a shower, things like that. It's hard, and only like real masters can kind of do that without having to lean on those elements. And so, in a way, a lot of the filmmakers, because it was cheap and easy to make a horror movie, so they weren't like the best cinematographers, they weren't the best directors, they weren't the best actors. They would make these movies, and they would rely on these elements, and it soon became almost like a competition, like who could have the most violence, who can have the better gore pieces, the better kills, who have the, cram in the most sex, all those things added to the enjoyment factor of movies that are probably not all that great. And yeah, there's a lot of people out there who think that the movies in those periods are just trash. They were trash, they were lowest common denominator, they were too raunchy, too violent. And because of that, the MPA just kind of like put their foot down. And after that, there was quite a big change. Movies became less graphic in their violence, less sexual content, less nudity. I'm not saying that all movies followed this suit, but you can see a dramatic shift. And unfortunately, most horror movies are just okay. They're not spectacular. And what made them spectacular were those other elements. And when you took those things away, they became less spectacular. They became more mediocre. It was hard to maintain an audience's interest without those elements. I'm not saying that it can't be done. It can be done. I mean, look at The Conjuring. The Conjuring doesn't have any graphic violence. It doesn't have any sex or nudity. I mean, literally, it's pretty plain on those aspects, but yet it is a really good movie because they did a masterful job putting all the pieces together and creating tension and weaving a great story and keeping you involved that way. But you can't always get that because the majority of horror movies are low budget. You don't get the big directors, you don't get the big actors. If you do, it's not really a horror movie, it's more of a action fantasy with horror elements. But yeah, it's hard to do, and unfortunately because of that, it seems more and more like less movies hit their marks. And then you get to the present day where it's almost a given that a horror movie is going to be PG-13. Like the majority of horror movies that are coming out nowadays are going to be PG-13, which means they're not going to have any real gore. They're not going to have any of those like really salacious content. So they either have to really bring it, or they're going to become boring. They're going to meander. They're going to have to pull out all kinds of gimmicks, and that's when you get things like people bemoaning the jump scares. It's all jump scares, jump scares. Well, that's all they really have in their arsenal nowadays, especially if they can't get quality writing, quality directing, quality acting. They're going to have to rely on those things. And unfortunately, a lot of times they just don't do it well enough. You get the horrible found footage movies like the Paranormal Activity movies, which are just absolutely boring. And unfortunately, because of that, I'm less likely to really go looking for the modern day horror movies. Honestly, it took me how many years? 2 years to watch The Conjuring, because I just went, oh my, it's just, it's gonna be like so many disappointments, and I didn't want to waste my time, I guess, in that way. I mean, at least if I'm looking at a movie in the 80s, I'm probably gonna find some gore. I'm gonna probably find some TNA. I know, at least I know that there's a good chance it's a bad movie, but at least I'm gonna have some stuff that I can grasp onto and like and enjoy from that experience. But nowadays, you know that you're not gonna have that, and so it's got to be either really good or it's gonna be boring as hell. there's hardly any middle ground anymore because of that. And another thing that really, is crazy is the MPAA's message, because they rated The Conjuring R because it was too scary. That's why. That's the only reason it was rated R, is because of scares, which tells me that PG-13 horror movies can't be scary. They can't be scary, because if they're scary, they'd be rated R. So that means PG-13 movies not only won't have any of the sensational stuff, but they will also not be scary, because if they were scary, they'd have to be rated R. It's like the line has been moved to R, so that, like, I remember watching some horror movies that were rated PG back, that were made in the 70s. And I mean, even think about this, like Raiders of the Lost Ark was rated PG, and people's faces melted off. Someone's head exploded in that movie. That's rated PG. Nowadays, that movie's rated R. That movie is rated R. You get a face melt scene, a head explosion, that's an automatic R. And nowadays, you've got the line pushed so far up that you say the F word twice, you're rated R immediately. That's okay. Wow. You have just a little bit of violent content. They're really trying to push you into that R category all of a sudden. And to me, it de-incentivizes the studios to push those envelopes, because they want the PG-13, they want the wide audience release. And maybe tastes have changed. Yeah, tastes have changed. The current horror movie going audiences that put the money down on them now probably don't mind as much. Probably don't have the context of what came before, and that's fine. And that's okay. I mean, it's all right. I don't like it, but it's not the end of my world. It sucks for me, but hey, I'm not in control of it, so I'm not gonna cry myself to sleep because of that. I know there are some people, and you see it all over in whatever genre, that they cry is like, they're not making the games that I want them to make. They're not making the movies that I want them to make. They're not making the TV shows that I want them to make. They're pandering to all these other people whose tastes are different than mine, and that's horrible, and I hate it, and I'm going to be angry, and we should tear down the system and destroy those evil businesses, because that's the reason. They would not be making those things if it wasn't for that. They'd be making what I like. Unfortunately, that's just not the case, That's just not the case. I mean, maybe a little bit, but still, and I'm not going to be that guy that's just going to just wring my fists and be angry because they're not making, super spectacular, practical effects-driven gore fests every year in and out. No, but yes, it helps skew my preferences, and it does create that sort of image, especially in my mind, that, yeah, like a contemporary horror movie is not going to be that great. So, as I'm answering this question, it's not because there aren't good horror movies. It's not because they can't do it. It's just because there are more that came before. There's the sheer number of movies, the sheer number of good movies, and the way they made them, the content they used, are things that I like, that I want to look for. I mean, I have not found the perfect horror movie yet. I'm still looking, and that would be a movie that is super enjoyable, super gory, super violent, super creative, and also super sexy. It just hasn't happened yet. It never will, probably. But still, I'm still looking for it, and I love to search. But to me, I'm not going to find that movie in contemporary cinemas. I'm gonna find that movie back in history. That's just the way it is. So this is a long video. It's kind of a rant, but I thought because this is the end, and I had that question, and I thought maybe because one person has that question, maybe others had that question, and I thought I'd explain it and kind of give you my perspective on it. And yeah, that's it. So there we go. It is the end. Episode 31. The end of the Perverts Have Spoken.